Masechet Sanhedrin Daf Chaf He Malveh Beribit. The Mishnah listed a whole bunch of people who are disqualified from being witnesses, and one of them is someone who lends money with interest. Amar Rava Loveh Beribit Pasul La'edut. Now Rava says that a borrower who borrows with interest cannot be a witness. We ask a challenge to Rava from the Mishnah. V'hanan tenan Malveh Beribit. Rava says a borrower cannot be a witness, but the Mishnah says a lender who lends with interest cannot be a witness. So which one is it? Is it the borrower or is it the lender? And the answer is milveh haba'a beribit. Don't read the Mishnah malveh beribit, which means the lender, but rather milveh, which is a noun referring to a loan. Any loan that is with interest, all the parties that are involved in the loan, both the borrower and the lender, are prohibited. So that's what Rava was clarifying by saying loveh. Don't think that the Mishnah is malveh, the lender. It's actually milveh, a loan, and that refers to everyone. When the Mishnah was remembered orally, then that would have been clear. Bar binitos as hidu be teresahade. Chadamar kamedidi ozif beribita. Vechadamar lididi ozfe beribita. Pasle Rava lebar binitos. We have a story about a man named Bar binitos, and two witnesses came and testified that he lent money with interest. But they said something slightly different. One of them says, it was in front of me that this guy lent money with interest. Okay, he saw Bar binitos lend someone else, a third party, money with interest. But the other witness said, I saw that he lent me money with interest. In other words, the second witness is saying, I was the borrower and he lent money with interest. And Rava, based on two witnesses, said that Bar binitos is disqualified from serving as a witness. Okay, makes sense. There's two witnesses against him that says that he lent money with interest. But now we have a challenge against Rava's ruling. V'ha Rava Huda amar loveh beribit pasul edut v'hava le rasha v'Torah amra al tashet rasha ed. Rava himself said that someone who borrows with interest is disqualified from being a witness because he is an evildoer, and the Torah said, do not place a wicked man as a witness. So here, the second witness, by testifying that he's the one that borrowed with interest, actually is disqualifying himself from being a witness. And since he is a disqualified witness, we end up only with one witness against Bar binitos, and one witness is not enough, and therefore Bar binitos should be considered valid to be a witness, right? In other words, the second witness was self-incriminating, and therefore he disqualified himself, and there's no longer two witnesses. The answer is Rava leta'amed amar Rava Adam karov etzel asmo ve'en Adam mesim asmo rasha. Rava himself also said that a person is related to himself, and a person cannot be a witness against a relative. So a person cannot declare himself to be a wicked person. If someone comes to court and says, I did this sin, well, we don't believe him because a person doesn't do that, and a person's related to himself. Usually a relative it comes and helps you out. That's what we say. They're an interested party. They want to do something good for you, but maybe not. Maybe sometimes people are self-hating and they want to cause bad to themselves. But the point is that a person is not believed with regard to himself, not for good and not for bad. And therefore, when the second guy testifies and says, I lent money from this guy with interest, we ignore the part of his testimony regarding himself, but we do uphold the part of his testimony regarding Bar binitos. And so in the end, regarding Bar binitos, we do have two valid witnesses that he lent money with interest, and therefore Rava was correct to disqualify him. Another story. There was a ritual slaughter, a butcher, and he was found that he had a terefa animal that he was selling. A terefa animal, he did shechita, but then he found that this is an animal that had a wound or a disease that would have caused it to die within 12 months. And that's not kosher. And he was selling it as kosher meat. You can't tell when you look at it, once it's all butchered up, So the people, the buyers did not know, but then it was found out that he's selling non-kosher meat. This is terrible. Pisaleh Rav Nachman ve'abre. So Rav Nachman said, you can no longer be a valid witness because you're an evildoer. You don't even care about other people. And he also removed him from his position. He is no longer, he took away his kosher certification. He cannot sell meat anymore. Azal Rabbe Mazieh ve'tufre. So Rav Nachman le'achshure. So the butcher went and he grew his fingernails and his hair as a kind of mourning to show his remorse. He wants to make Teshuva, and so he did this as a sign of Teshuva. And Nachman said, look, I see he feels bad. All right, look how he's doing these things. He's making Teshuva. He's acting kind of like a mourner. So Rav Nachman says, I think we should reinstate him and he can sell meat again and we can accept him as a witness. Amar Rava Dilma i'arume ka ma'arim. Rava was tougher though. He said, maybe it's only for show. He lost his business. That's why he's doing this. But maybe he didn't really make teshubah inside. Ela ma'ita kantes. What is he supposed to do? I mean, he's doing, he's doing everything he can, right? כדרב אידי בר אבין, דאמר רב אידי בר אבין, החשוד על הטרפות, אין לו תקנה שילך למקום שאין מכירים אותו, ויחזיר הבידה בדבר חשוב, או שיוציא טרפה מתחת ידו, בדבר חשוב משלו. So actually, he has to do more, as Rav Idi bar Avin said, because he said someone who was suspected of selling non-kosher meat as if it's kosher, he has no way to fix himself unless he goes to another city where nobody knows him. If he stays in the same city, then we suspect he's only doing this to improve his reputation, but he doesn't really mean to make teshuvah. He's still going to do the same evil thing again. He's just doing it for show. So he has to go to a place where nobody knows him. And when he's there, he has to give back someone a lost item that was valuable to show that, look, he could have kept it for himself because he was greedy in the past. He would sell non-kosher meat for money, but now he's changed, and look how he gives someone back a lost item and doesn't keep it for himself. That would show that he changed. Or if there is a terefa animal that he has and he gets rid of it, he removes it, he says, oh, this is not kosher, and he throws it out. If he does either of those two things in a place where nobody knows him, then we know he's not just doing it for show. He really means to do this teshuvah sincerely. And then we can reinstate him in his job back in his home city. Umafriche yonim, the Mishnah mentioned these people who fly pigeons are also disqualified from being witnesses. Mai mafriche yonim. What does this refer to? What are they doing exactly? Hacha targuma tikdeme yonach leyon. So here in Bavel, the rabbis explain that they're betting on pigeons. They're doing pigeon racing, and one of them says to the other, if your pigeon gets there first before my pigeon, I will give you $1,000. But if my pigeon wins, then you give me $1,000. So it's basically gambling, betting. Rabbi Chama bar Oshaya amar ara. However, Rabbi Chama in Eretz Yisrael says it's referring to training a pigeon to go and steal other pigeons. Some guy has a nest in his yard, and I train my pigeon to go and take the young pigeons from my neighbor's yard. So this is not gambling, but rather stealing, indirectly stealing, because you're doing it with the pigeon, but you're training the pigeon to go and steal other people's pigeons. And anyone who's a thief also cannot be a witness. Now the opinion that says it's a gambler, how come they didn't say it's talking about a thief? Because they would say that training a pigeon to steal other pigeons is not technically stealing. Rather, it's only prohibited because of the way of peace. In other words, pigeons are wild birds. They fly around everywhere. Just because you have a nest that happens to be somewhere in your yard doesn't actually make it yours, because you can't hold on to it. They can simply fly away. So really, if I go and take the pigeon from your yard, I am not stealing because it's not private property. Pigeons are public property. Now, the rabbis say, listen, for ways of peace, we tell people not to go and take other people's pigeons because people will get upset about it. if I go into your yard and get your pigeon, or your pigeon flies and I catch it, you're going to come and you're going to get angry and we're going to have fights. So the rabbis say, listen, don't go take other people's pigeons and don't train your pigeons to go and get other people's pigeons. But if you do, it's only the Rabbanan for the sake of peace. It's not actually stealing. And that's why they say, even if you would steal other people's pigeons, it would not be stealing midoraita, and therefore it would not disqualify someone from being a witness. So that's why they say it's gambling. Now that opinion in Eretz Yisrael that said it's stealing, how come they didn't say that's talking about gambling, pigeon racing? And that opinion would say that's the same as gambling with dice. For the point, gambling with dice, gambling with pigeon racing, both are types of gambling, so it's the same thing. V'idach, and now the opinion that says it's gambling, why do you need two examples of gambling in the Mishnah? Just say one, and I could figure out the other, right? Whatever the reason is. Either it's because it's stealing because it's asmachta, or because of yishuvo shel olam, that they're not contributing to the good of the world, right? Either way, just give one example, and I can figure out to tell me every type of game that one can use for gambling. So why don't they? What do they say about that? Tana tole bedat asmo utana tole bedat yono. In fact, we do need both examples, because one of them, playing with dice, is dependent on your own decision. It's totally up to you how you roll the dice and how you play the game. It's all about your decisions. That's one type of gambling. And the other one is dependent on the pigeon. So it's not all totally in your hands, because the pigeon could have a good day, feel good, feel lousy, and so it's not totally in your hands. And therefore, you might not necessarily apply the law if you only had one of them, as follows: Usiricha di tenat tole bedat asmo hatamhu de lo gamad umakne damad kimli be nafshai di yada natefe about tole bedat yono ema la. If we only had the case of playing with dice, where it's totally in your hands, there you would, the gambler is thinking to himself, listen, I'm definitely going to win, because I know how to play this game really well. I'm really good at this game, and so I know I'm going to win, and therefore he does not resolve himself to pay the other guy in case he loses. And that's why if he indeed loses, he wouldn't want to give over the money, and therefore the guy who wins is considered stealing. So that's why when it's up to yourself, both sides are thinking the same thing. I know how to play this game well. That's why they're putting money on it in the first place, and therefore whoever loses did not resolve to actually give the money over, and feels like, this is my money and the other guy's stealing. Since he didn't resolve to give the money, the guy who takes the money is in fact a thief. And so that's why he cannot be a witness. However, if it's regarding a pigeon, so a person knows, listen, the pigeon might have a good day, might have a bad day. It's not up to me. It's really up to the luck of what happens with the pigeon. So because he knows that, and he knows he may very well lose, when he enters the game, he does resolve to give over the money, and therefore the guy who wins it is not considered stealing. I might have thought that. So that's why I need the case of the pigeon to tell me that even when it depends on the pigeon, still a person does not resolve to give over the money, and it is considered stealing. And the other way around also. If we only had the case of a pigeon, where it depends on the pigeon, but in the case of pigeon, there is something that the owner can do to make his pigeon go faster, which is it would knock on trees. Maybe this is where the phrase comes from, knock on wood, to get better luck. They would knock on trees and other things to push the pigeon along to make it go faster. It's because rooting it on from the side. So there's an amount of skill involved. I know how to do that. And they'll think, for sure I'm going to win. And then if he loses, he feels like he was stolen from. I know how to knock better than the other guy. But when it comes to gambling with dice, there it's totally about luck. There's no strategy involved. So there, since it's totally luck, so he knows it depends if I get a 1, if I get a 6, and he thinks to himself that he may very well lose, and he does resolve to give over the money, and therefore it's not stealing. I might have thought that if I didn't have both cases, and that's why I need both cases, that it doesn't matter whether it's based totally on luck, or whether it's based on skill, whether it's based just on yourself, or based on something else that happens. No matter what, anyone who enters into gambling, they feel like they're going to win. And then if they have to give over the money, they feel like they did not resolve to give it over, but they're being stolen from, and therefore the guy who takes it is taking money that the other guy didn't willingly give over, and therefore whoever wins is a thief. And that's why we need both cases. And now we have a challenge from a baraita against the opinion that says, talking about a pigeon thief. This is going to be a long baraita. The proof is going to be from the middle over down here. And it says, it goes through the various examples. So someone who plays with dice. The Baraita elaborates, it is referring to people who play with pis pasim, which is small pieces of like mosaics, small stones that could be mosaics, or sometimes it's used for voting. You put a certain color into a box, or it can be used for dice. So it's referring to people who play with any of these kind of checkers or dice. And not only these things that professionals use at your actual game pieces, but even if someone is playing with nutshells or pomegranate shells, there it might be like heads or tails. You flip over a nutshell, if it falls on this side or on that side, I win and you lose. So it's referring to any games of luck like that. Now, how can you make Teshuva? Let's say you did play these games for money, and you won money, and therefore you're a thief, and now you want to make Teshuva. What do you do to make Teshuva? That you have to, it's not enough to just stop gambling. You have to actually break these checkers, these pieces, and dice that you use and make full Teshuva. Full Teshuva means that you stop playing the games even without betting. Because although if you never bet before and then you want to play a game without money, that's okay. But in order to make, if you already are guilty and you have to make Teshuva, then you have to go to the other extreme. Like someone, if you drink a little, that's okay. If someone's alcoholic, they have to go to the other extreme and not drink anything at all, so they don't even come and be tempted to sin again. And so in order to make Teshuva, it's not enough to stop gambling. Yeah, and I'll have the pieces around. You have to smash them and never play the game at all, not even for free. Malveh beribit, echad malveh v'echad haloveh. Baraita elaborates that when we say those who lend with interest, it's referring to both the lender and the borrower, as we said above. How do you make Teshuva if you did lend money or borrow money with interest? Well, first of all, you have to tear up those promissory notes. The note says that you owe me $100 with interest. We have to tear it up, and I cannot collect that interest. And not only that, I have to go even to the extreme and not even lend money to a non-Jew with interest. Although, according to halacha, it's permitted to lend money to a non-Jew with interest, but so if a regular person can. But if someone already violated lending money to a Jew, now they have to go to the total extreme, total Teshuva, and not lend money at all to anyone, even to a non-Jew. So to be sure that they don't come to lend money again in a prohibited way. And those who fly pigeons is someone who induces the pigeon to behave in a certain way. Now this is still not clear what that means, but here's the real challenge from the next phrase. Not only pigeons, but even other domesticated animals, wild animals, and birds. So this is the proof, because it wouldn't make any sense to say if you train your sheep to go steal someone else's sheep. Sheep don't do that. So rather, it can't be. It's not talking about pigeons stealing other pigeons, but rather racing. Racing you can do with other animals too. People do dog racing, pig racing. So one can race all kinds of animals, chickens, and so on. So how do you make Teshuva? So it's not enough just to stop betting on these races. You actually have to break the stages. They would make stages and use the stages to stand on while they were doing this in front of an audience. And so you have to destroy them to show I'm not going to do it ever again. And not only that, you have to make sure that you don't even race animals or pigeons, even out in the desert where there's nobody there to bet on it. Usually they do it in a stadium or some public place where everybody would be betting. You can't do it at all, not even in the wilderness. Even if there's nobody betting on it, still don't do it at all. Stay far away from this entire activity. We'll come back to the question. First, we're going to finish the Baraita. Sochare Shevi'it, elu shenosin venotnin beperot Shevi'it. The merchants of Shevi'it, that's people who buy and sell. They do business with produce of Shevi'it. When everything's supposed to be hefker, if something grows on its own and nobody planted or worked the land, then you can take some for yourself, but you're not allowed to make money off of it. So if someone does that, they have to make Teshuva. You have to be in the same situation as you were before. So that means you have to wait 7 years when the next Shevi'it comes and not sell anything during that Shevi'it year. ואמר רבי נחמיה, לא חזרת דברים בלבד אמרו, אלא חזרת ממון, כיצד אומר, אני פלוני בר פלוני, כינסתי 200 זוז בפירות שביעית, הרי הן נתונין במתנה לעניים. Rabbi Nehemiah explains when it says Hazara, return, it's not only verbal repentance that you say, I'm not going to do that. It's not sufficient to say I'm not going to do that and also not sell any Shevi'it produce in the next Shevi'it, but rather Hazara also means returning the money that one gained in an illegal way. How do you return the money? The problem is this is not stealing from a person. If you steal from a person, you return the money to that person. But here, everything that grows is actually hefker. So who are you going to return it to? So the Rabbi Nehemiah explains, you get up and you declare, and you say your name, I made 200 zuz during the Shevi'it from selling Shevi'it produce, and now I'm going to give it as a gift to the poor. So you don't return it to the owner of the field because the owner didn't own the produce during Shevi'it year, but rather the point is you give it away and you give it to the poor, and so you can't keep the ill-gotten gain and still make Teshuva. Katane mihat behema. That's the end of the Braita. And now the point is, when we said flying pigeons, we said, and also domesticated animals. So if you say it's talking about pigeon racing, well, one can race domesticated animals also. So that would make sense. But if you say that's talking about training your pigeon to go steal other pigeons, can you do that with a domesticated animal? Is it capable of going and taking and training it to go and steal another animal? And the answer is actually in Bishor Habad, this type of wild ox. It can be lured away from its owner because it's not completely domesticated. If it's completely domesticated like a sheep, it's going to stay with its owner. You're not going to be able to get it away. But this one is considered a behema, technically. If we follow the opinion that says Shor Habad is in fact a domesticated animal. And we see there is a machloket about this in the Mishnah Kilayim Ditnan, Shor Habad min behemahu, Rabbi Yosef Omer min hayam. The Tanakama says that this wild ox is a behema. Rabbi Yosef says it's a hayah. So if we follow Tanakama that says it's a behema, so that's the behema that the Baraita was talking about. It is technically a behema, although it acts in some ways like a wild animal. And this, in fact, you could train this type of animal. We might be talking about a European bison or something else. It acts in a wild way that if you would train another animal to go and take it from its owner, it would be susceptible to that. And so we actually have an answer to explain the Baraita according to that opinion as well. Tana, Hosifu alehen agazdanin v'achamsanin. A Baraita teaches that the rabbis added to the list of people who are disqualified from being a witness, and the people that they added are robbers and people who commit extortion. They take person's item and they pay for it, but they don't pay the real price. They say, I'm buying this from you. It's not for sale. And now it is, and they pay half the price. So they commit extortion. Now we ask about this. Gazlan deoraitahu. What do you mean that the rabbis added that robbers also are disqualified from being witnesses? The rabbis don't have to add that. A robber, it's a prohibition mid-deoraita. And on the deoraita level already, they are prohibited from being witnesses. So what do you mean that the rabbis added it? And the answer is, we're talking about not people who are outright robbers and taking other people's private property, but for example, they steal something from a deaf person, an imbecile, or a child. If a child finds an item in the street and he takes it for himself, so he doesn't have enough da'at, enough mental capacity to actually own it. And therefore, if someone else comes and snatches it from that child, they are not technically committing robbery because it's still a lost item and the child does not actually have it. And therefore, on the Doraita level, they are not robbers and they can still be witnesses. So, Meikara Savur, originally the rabbis thought, at first they thought, you know what, this doesn't happen often, that a child finds something and then people come and snatch it. So we don't have to make a gezerah about that because they only make a gezerah on something that happens often. Or alternatively, it's only prohibited because of Darkei Shalom. You don't want these children or deaf people going and starting fights to say, I picked it up first. Now, technically, it's not really theirs, but still they feel like it's theirs, and that's going to cause fights. And so it's only because of the sake of peace, but not technically stealing. So at first they said, leave it alone. If someone takes an item like that, it doesn't happen so often, it's not technically stealing, so they can still be a witness. But then later on, the rabbis realized that in the end, they are taking money from someone, and they're not supposed to be, and that kind of person is also going to be an outright thief, and therefore that type of personality cannot be a witness. At first, they did not make a law against people who commit extortion. They said they could still be witnesses because at first they thought, well, look, first of all, he's paying something, even if it's less than the actual value. Okay, still not total theft because he's paying something, and it happens only occasionally. This is not such a common problem, so we no need to make a law about this. But then the rabbis saw that this is common, and the same people who commit extortion, they are also outright thieves, and this kind of personality is not fit to be a witness. Tana. Another Braita says that the rabbis further added at some later point the shepherds and Gabai is not the Sadiqim that work in Bet Knesset to give out aliyot. Here we're talking about a tax collector, and we'll see about them, and Mochsin customs officials. And these people also are not valid to be witnesses. Well, let's see why. The problem with shepherds is that sometimes they have some sheep, and the sheep go and graze in someone else's land, private property, and that's called stealing. So at first they said it just happened incidentally, by mistake. So a few sheep went onto a private property, and the shepherd didn't do it on purpose. So we're not going to say that the shepherd is disqualified. But then they saw that these shepherds, they go and they do it intentionally. They move their sheep towards private property because it's lots of nice grass there, and that's just stealing. And so therefore the rabbi said, all shepherds, we have to assume that they are all thieves, because many of them really do go and move their sheep onto private property. So the tax collectors and the customs officials, at first the rabbis thought that they only take the fixed amount that they're supposed to take. The government would hire these private collectors, and the government would say, this is how much you can take from the people. And so if they do it that way, that's totally fine. And so they're not stealing. They're just working for the government, taking what is owed to the government. So they're doing a proper job, and that's why the rabbis did not make any gezerah about it. However, later on, they saw that the tax collectors are taking more than they're supposed to, and they're taking it for themselves. The government says you can take $1,000. They go to each person and says, you have to give me $2,000, and they keep half for themselves. So that's outright theft. So that's why the rabbi said the tax collectors and the customs officials are thieves, and they cannot be witnesses. Rava says that when we talk about shepherds, we're talking about both shepherds of small livestock, like sheep and goats, and also large livestock, like cows and oxen, as two different types of animals. Both of them, they go and steal, and they go. The shepherds take them on private property. Umi amar Rava hachi, is that true that Rava said that? V'amar Rava ro'eh behema daka beretz Yisrael pesulin bechutz haaretz kesherin ro'eh behema gasa afilu beretz Yisrael kesherin. Rava made a distinction, and he said that if it's small animals in Israel, then those shepherds no good. But outside the land of Israel, small animals, it's okay. It happens, they tend to steal more when they're in Israel than outside the land of Israel. So outside the land of Israel, they can be witnesses. And regarding big animals, even within Eretz Israel, it's okay. It's easier to control the big animals than the small animals that just go and wander around. And so the Rava made a distinction and said within Israel, only if it's a shepherd of sheep, they are disqualified, but if a shepherd of oxen and cows is okay, this contradicts what Rava said over here. And the answer is, Ahu bemegadelim itemar. This later statement that Rava said is talking about the owners that raise animals on their own land. If you raise animals on your own land, then if it's big animals, they tend to stay on your own land, and that's okay, they won't be thieves. But if it's small animals, then even on your own land, they tend to go and onto other people's land, and it's no good. That's talking about if you generally graze the animals on your own land. However, the previous statement of Rava is talking about shepherds who take animals and they go out to public property, to public parks and places. And over there, it's more likely that, they're on some public property, but then they're going to take all kinds of animals onto other people's property. So that's it depends on what case we're talking about. And Rava is not contradicting himself. And in fact, this makes sense. This the first statement of Rava, who said that cattle herders are no good for being witnesses, because we learned this already in the Mishnah. If both parties agree and they say the three cattle herders, I trust them, and so they're okay with me. So what is it talking about? My lav la edut isn't the Mishnah talking about that I trust them to be witnesses? And we see from there that this is an exceptional case where both litigants agree that these cattle herders can be witnesses. Only then it's okay, but otherwise cattle herders would not be valid witnesses. And so that's a proof for Rava that cattle herders, not only small animals but also for big animals, would be disqualified. Lo ledina. No, that's not the Mishnah meant. Mishnah was not talking about being witnesses, but rather being judges. And look at the language. It says, I trust these three cattle herders. Now, why three? If it's for testimony, you only need two. So if it's three, must be that it's for judges. And that's how we learned it also, that two litigants, we're picking judges, and we both agree, these three cattle herders, we trust to be judges, even though usually cattle herders are not learned. Okay, so now how are you interpreting the Mishnah as talking about using three cattle herders as judges? But then why would it pick an example of three cattle herders, which is the lowest of the low in terms of education? Even three regular people who are not very learned cannot serve on a court. So you shouldn't use only you don't have to use the lowest example. You could have used a medium example. Why would you say three cattle herders specifically, right? Any three people that are not learned would also normally be disqualified. So just use a regular example. And the answer is Hachikamad. Afilu hane de la shechiche biyeshuv. Even cattle herders, not only that they're not learned in Torah, they don't even know the way of civilization. Cattle herders, they're out in the rural areas, and they don't even know the way of commerce and business. So they're extra not good as judges because they don't even know the normal things that people do in business. And the Mishnah wants to teach that even so, although they don't know Torah and they don't even know civilization and business, if the two litigants say, we trust them, then that's okay. then they can choose them as judges. And then the question is, what if they change their mind and so on? Amar Rav Yehuda, Sitam ro'eh pasul, Sitam gabay kasher. Rav Yehuda says a typical shepherd is no good. You could find a shepherd who's learned. It's possible. Some people say shepherding is a good fast track to becoming a prophet. All the prophets were shepherds. Okay, so it's not across the board, but generally, if you find a shepherd, probably they are disqualified from being a witness, unless you test them out and see, okay, this is a very good shepherd and is honest, and make sure that the sheep don't go off grazing in other people's lands. And a typical tax collector is okay. Generally, a tax collector is going to only collect what he is authorized to collect. He's going to do what the government said. Sometimes there are bad tax collectors that are thieves and take for themselves. But he would be a proper witness until proven otherwise. And now we end off with a story of an example of a tax collector who was honest. Abu Rabbi Zera, the father of Rabbi Zera, Avad Gabayuta Telesar Shenin. He was a tax collector for 13 years. Ki hava teresh nahara lemata, ki hava chazera banan. Amar lehu, lech ami bo b'chadarecha. Now he worked for a head tax collector. When the head tax collector would come to town, the head tax collector wanted to see how many people live here, how rich are they, and then he would assess how much this town needs to give. So Rabbi Zera, who was the sub-tax collector, when he knew that the head tax collector was coming to town, he would give everybody a warning to hide. And so when he saw the rabbis, he would tell the rabbis, everybody go hide in your chambers. Now the rabbis, he trusted not to give away the secret, so he could tell them explicitly, listen, tax collector is coming, everybody hide. Ki hava chazeh inashe de matamar resh nahara ata lemata va'idana naches abba lefum bera ubra lefum abba. They would also warn the regular citizens, but he would do it in a more subtle way. And he would tell the regular citizens, listen, the head tax collector is coming to town. And today, they're going to slaughter the father in front of the son and the son in front of the father. Not literally they're going to kill them, but rather they're going to take people's money and they're going to take the father and the child and the son. They're going to take everybody's money. It's going to be a slaughterhouse, figuratively, because everybody's going to have to give up so much of their money. And so he didn't say explicitly go hide. He just said it in this roundabout way. And that way, if anybody, when the tax collector said, if there's someone unscrupulous would say something, so no, I never told people to hide. I just told people, something or other. Umi ganzu kule alma. And then, but everybody would know what he's talking about, and everybody would go hide. So then, when the tax collector would come, he would look around and says, who am I going to collect tax from? This is a ghost town. Nobody lives here. And so he would make only a low amount, and he would say, this is very not a very populated town, so they only have to pay a small amount. And then he would leave and he would collect that much. And so you see that Rabbi Zera was very scrupulous, and he wanted to make sure that people paid as little as possible. Certainly, he did not take for himself, as we see from the continuation of the story. When Rabbi Zera's father was on his deathbed, he said, listen, take this 13 ma'ah, a relatively small amount, they're tied up in my sheet, and return it to this person, because I took it from him to pay tax, but now that I made the calculation, I say we don't need it. So you see, even this relatively small amount that he already collected, he had in mind, he kept it separate, and he says, oh, I made a mistake, return it to that person. So you see how scrupulous this tax collector was, and so therefore we see that there are honest tax collectors, and a standard person who's a tax collector, we can trust him to be a witness, unless unless proven otherwise, that they are a thief and taking more for themselves. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen ve'amen.